Hi, this is Jay from paulpolito.com, and welcome to the next installment in our screencast series about Linux installation and package management. 102.1 Design Hard Disk Layout Part 2. In this screencast, we will talk about the design of a Linux file system, and we will explain LBA and the difference between primary, extended, and logical partitions. Further on, we will talk about what a swap partition is. File system design. LPIC expects you to know how to tailor the design of mount points to the intended use of the system. Here, we will discuss three different types of Linux systems. Let's start with the basic system. Newer Linux distributions often have a default installation routine. If accepted by the user, at least 3 partitions or volumes are created. Root. This is the root or top-level directory. Here you will find the whole Linux file system in the form of a directory tree. /boot. Linux systems frequently configure a separate /boot partition. Swap space. Most Linux distributions also configure a partition for swap space. The swap partition is typically twice the size of the installed system RAM. The file server. In a production environment, you often will find a Linux server configured as a file server. On a file server, a central /home directory is commonly configured, which points to a central NFS server. NFS stands for Network File Service. Another common method to configure a file server is to share /home directories on a Samba or an FTP server. Samba is a file sharing software implementation which uses the server message block protocol, and FTP stands for File Transfer Protocol. Of course, a file server with the /home directories mounted on the local hard disks is also a possible scenario. Whichever server is selected, the best practice is to set up all shared directories on separate volumes. If the administrator or users overload the volume on any of these services, then it will not affect the basic operation of that system because the volumes are on separate partitions. For example, when separately mounted, an overloaded /var FTP pub directory only prevents users from uploading files to that server, but the underlying Linux system will stay completely functional. Web server. The space challenge associated with a web server is based on log data. This data may be data from users or connection logs. In any case, log data from a web server can rise up to a few gigabytes of data every day. On an improperly configured web server, the logs can easily overload the whole Linux system and make it completely inaccessible. For security and stability reasons, it therefore makes sense to mount the log directory /var log apache2 or the entire /var directory on a separate volume. LBA and partitions. Historically, a hard disk was divided into cylinder, heads, and sectors, with partitions normally configured in a fixed number of cylinders. With the deployment of LBA, which stands for Logical Block Addressing, and hard disks larger than 8 gigabytes, the cylinder head sector division in many ways became obsolete. But this organization is still used by many partition tools. LBA now translates the cylinder head sector division into numbers that support the larger hard drives as used today. Although you have already heard about partitions in the last screencast, we will discuss the term partition here in more detail. As you already know, a partition can be configured as a part of a hard disk, or it can encompass the entire hard drive. There are 3 partition types available on a Linux system. Primary partition. A hard disk can be configured with up to 4 primary partitions. Extended partition. One of the primary partitions on a hard drive can be reassigned as an extended partition. The extended partition is designed as a kind of container for logical partitions. Logical partitions. The extended partition on a drive can be further subdivided into distinct logical partitions. Primary and logical partitions can both be configured as containers for the data of a Linux system. After formatting, these partitions can then be dedicated to specific directories. Also important to know, primary and logical partitions can be part of a logical volumes or a RAID array, both of which are covered later in the LPIC2 objectives. Swap partitions. To extend the effective volatile random access memory, known as RAM, it is standard on a Linux system to have a dedicated area for swap space. Although also the configuration of swap files is possible, most Linux systems set up swap space in a dedicated partition. This partition then is formatted to its own Linux file system, which, by the way, has the partition type ID 82. The most common rule regarding swap space is configure twice the amount of available system RAM as swap space. Swap space can be set up on both primary and logical partitions. Summary. The file system design of a Linux system depends on the intended use of the system. A basic Linux desktop system, for example, could contain only a root, /boot, and swap partition. A file server will probably make use of separated /home directories, which are then shared by NFS, Samba, or FTP, while a web server probably would use a separate /var partition. The three partition types available on a Linux system are primary partitions, extended partitions, and logical partitions. To extend the effective volatile random access memory, known as RAM, it is standard on a Linux system to have a dedicated area for swap space. Study points. We strongly recommend that you install several Linux systems for different purposes by using the installation routine of your favorite Linux distribution. You should try to install a Linux desktop system with separate /home, /boot, and swap partition, a Linux file server with separate /home, /user, and swap partition, a Linux web server with separate /boot, /var, /srv, and swap partitions. During installation, make use of all types of partitions, specifically primary, extended, and logical partition types. If you have more than one hard disk in your system, distribute the partitions over these drives. Thanks for watching this screencast about Linux installation and package management. Hope to see you next time.